Water, pressure, darkness, the deadliest forces on Earth waiting in places few dare to go. 4 teams of brave explorers faced these dangers in underwater caves, deep diving operations, and the world's most extreme caverns, not knowing they were heading toward disaster. These true stories reveal what happens when human courage meets nature's deadliest traps, and why some places were never meant to be explored. 3 minutes. That's how long a human can survive without air. Deep underwater, in pure darkness, time becomes different. Down there, we don't count minutes. We count heartbeats, breaths, and choices that mean life or death. In Norway's deadly Plura cave, a diver's call for help broke the silence. What happened next changed cave diving forever. This is a story about pushing limits, facing fear, and nature's raw power. Kai Kankinen was a top cave diver from Finland. With over 20 years of diving experience, he had explored some of the world's most challenging underwater caves. But even the best divers learn that water shows no mercy. On June 15, 2019, at 10:47 a.m., it happened on a normal training day at a local lake. Kai and his dive partner had done this dozens of times before. At 35 feet depth, the water was calm, visibility good. But underwater, things can go wrong in seconds. At 11:03 a.m., Kai noticed something was off. His friend had stopped moving. The regulator, the device that helps divers breathe, had fallen from his mouth. By 11:20 a.m., they had rushed to County General Hospital, but it was too late. A simple mistake caused the tragedy. His friend had forgotten to open the oxygen tank valve during the pre-dive check. Many would quit after losing a friend this way, but Kai saw it differently. Each dive after that day wasn't just about adventure. It was about getting better, safer, and honoring the sport that had taken his friend. But this was just the beginning of Kai's story, with death underwater. Plura Cave, one of Europe's largest underwater caves, hidden in Norway's frozen valley. Found in the 1990s, it stayed unexplored for years because divers didn't have good enough gear to handle its dangers. The cave was a monster, 3 kilometers long, water so cold it could kill. 2 doors to this underwater maze: enter through Plura Valley, exit through Steinugelflaget. 5 hours underwater, diving down to depths of 120 meters, where water pressure can crush equipment. Have you ever faced a moment when your confidence became your greatest enemy? In early 2024, Kai and 4 diving friends planned to take on this challenge. They weren't new to danger. Each had dived in some of the world's toughest caves. But Plura was different. It was bigger, deeper, colder. The team knew the risks. They'd heard stories of divers who went in and never came out. But they believed their experience would keep them safe. They spent weeks planning, checking their gear, and studying the cave maps. Little did they know that Plura Cave was about to show them why some places on Earth should stay unexplored. 5 expert cave divers prepared to challenge Plura Cave: Kai Kankinen, Patrick Gronquist, Vesa Rantanen, and 2 divers named Jari H. and Jari U. Each had countless hours underwater, but Plura demanded perfect planning. Their strategy seemed smart, split into 2 teams. Team 1 would go first. Then, after 2 hours, enough time for the cloudy water they stirred up to clear, Team 2 would follow. In deep caves, clear water can mean the difference between life and death. Kai and his team went through their final checks. Multiple tanks, backup lights, emergency reels, and enough air for the 5-hour journey. The cave's icy water waited below. No one spoke about what could go wrong at 120 meters deep. February 6th, 9 a.m. As winter sunlight touched Plura's entrance, Team 1 took their first steps into darkness. Team 2 would follow at 11 a.m. In cave diving, every minute counts. Noon struck. Patrick and Jari H. slipped through a hole in the ice into Plura's freezing embrace. The cave revealed itself with unusual clarity, rocks visible 60 feet below, a deceptive peace before the storm. Would this crystalline visibility be their final gift from Plura. Their gear represented diving's cutting edge. Underwater scooters to slice through currents. And most crucially, rebreathers, complex machines recycling each breath. These systems promised hours of survival, but harbored a deadly paradox. One malfunction, one surge of carbon dioxide, and confusion would set in. At these depths, confusion wasn't just dangerous, it was fatal. The rebreathers hissed softly as they descended, each recycled breath taking them further from safety. Their scooters hummed against ancient cave walls, beams cutting through water that wouldn't stay clear for long. In the darkness ahead, their high-tech lifelines, designed to protect them, were about to become part of Plura's latest mystery. How many divers before them had trusted their equipment, only to become permanent residents of these black waters? 500 meters into Plura Cave, Patrick and Yari H faced their first crisis. At the deepest point, the tunnel squeezed into a brutal 90-degree turn. The water here was dangerously cold. Every breath was painful. Patrick navigated the tight bend first, carefully laying a guide rope. But when he turned back, Yari wasn't there. Through the darkness, he spotted Yari's headlamp flickering wildly, a diver's nightmare. Yari had panicked. The underwater scooter's rope had wrapped around him, trapping him in the narrow passage. His movements became frantic, deadly behavior at this depth. Patrick rushed back, keeping his own breathing steady. He freed Yari from the rope and handed over his backup rebreather. But things got worse. In his panic, Yari had swallowed the cave's freezing water. At 120 meters deep, with a nearly 2-hour swim to either exit, this small mistake could turn fatal. Every experienced cave diver knows, panic kills, and panic was setting in. Deep underwater, Patrick faced a diver's worst fear. His watch showed he needed 400 minutes, nearly 7 hours, to get back up safely. Next to him, Yari was in trouble. His friend's jerky movements and confusion showed he was losing his fight against the cold, dark water. Patrick remembered his first diving lesson. Come up too fast. Otherwise your blood fills with deadly bubbles, like shaking a soda can. These bubbles could kill you or leave you paralyzed. But stay down here with Yari, and they'd both die. What would you do if saving your friend meant dying yourself? With shaking hands, Patrick chose life. He turned away from Yari's dying light and started the longest swim of his life. As he slowly made his way up, two thoughts haunted him. Could he have saved his friend? And how would he explain to others why he left Yari behind? Have you ever wondered what it feels like when death becomes your diving partner? In the darkness of Plura Cave, at depths where few humans had ever been, one diver fought for survival while another lay still. The cave wasn't finished claiming its victims. At 2 p.m., as the winter sun began its early descent, the second team made their entrance. Kai led his 3 teammates through the ice hole, their lights piercing water that had already swallowed 2 divers. Would they become heroes or victims? On the other side of Plura Cave, Kai's team faced their own nightmare. At 2:15 p.m., something went terribly wrong with Yari H's rebreather. Was it the extreme depth of 430 feet, or maybe ice crystals forming in his breathing tubes? His diving computer later showed his oxygen levels had dropped dangerously low without warning. Like a silent killer, the cold water -2 degrees Celsius had also taken its toll, affecting his judgment. Have you ever wondered how fast things can go wrong in the dark? The first sign of trouble came when Yari H started swimming erratically. Within minutes, the lack of oxygen confused him. He missed a crucial turn in the narrow tunnel, hit the cave wall, and his mouthpiece came loose. At these depths, even 20 seconds without air is too long. They found Yari U. He wasn't moving. His body blocked the narrow tunnel, a grim warning of what deep caves can do, but they had no time to process their grief. Panic spread through the team like ice in their veins. What's worse than finding a dead diver underwater? Realizing you might join them. Kai knew the signs. They were all near breaking point. 3 divers, 1 blocked path, failing equipment, and minds clouded by depth. In these black waters, would they become rescuers or the ones needing rescue. Looking at his team's scared faces, Kai made the call every dive leader dreads. We turn back. In caves this deep, retreat isn't giving up, it's choosing to live. Time and oxygen, two enemies every cave diver fears. As Kai's team fought their way back, their bodies screamed for rest, while their tanks whispered warnings. Each breath could be their last. What's scarier, running out of air underwater, or rising too fast and letting bubbles tear through your blood? Kai stared at his gauges in horror, oxygen running critically low. The safe way up meant certain death. The fast way up might kill him too, but might was better than certain. With trembling hands, he chose speed over safety. Not far away, Patrick's battery-powered gear was dying. The freezing water bit into his skin. He could only save one thing, his heater to fight the cold, or his underwater scooter to help him swim. At these depths, choose wrong, and you die. Would you risk freezing to death, or being too tired to swim out? Patrick picked the scooter. Without it, he'd never manage the long swim to safety. He'd have to battle the cold. As his fingers went numb and his muscles burned, Patrick pushed through the dark water, hoping he hadn't just made his last choice. 11 hours and 30 minutes underwater. Patrick and Visa surfaced first, bodies shaking from exhaustion. But Kai was still down there. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, barely able to stand. When Kai finally appeared, nature had one last cruel trick. Ice had sealed his exit. With trembling muscles and desperate hands, they broke through the frozen barrier. After nearly 12 hours in Plura's grip, Kai crawled into his van, empty of everything except guilt. 3 survivors huddled together, too tired to speak, too haunted to sleep. They had made it out alive, but at what cost? 2 friends left behind in the darkness. Their bodies never recovered. The physical pain would heal, bruises fade, muscles recover. But the weight of those choices made in the deep, the memories of friends lost, those would stay forever. The Plura cave incident forced Norway to make a hard decision. They sealed both entrances. The cave became a tomb, a reminder that some places in nature demand more respect than human courage can match. Word spread fast. 2 lives lost in Europe's deadliest cave. The Norwegian police faced a painful truth. Recovering bodies from Plura's depths seemed impossible. Too dangerous, they said. The cave would become their grave. But Patrick couldn't accept it. He made a promise. No diver left behind. In secret, he gathered a team of the world's best cave divers. Against official orders, they planned one final descent into Plura. The recovery mission was like nothing before. Hours underwater, fighting the same dangers that claimed their friends. Finally, they succeeded. Yari H and Yari U would get the proper goodbye they deserved. You might think this would be the end, that no one would dare challenge the deep again. But for elite cave divers, like Kai, Patrick, and Vesa, the call of underwater caves never fades. Months later, they were planning new dives in France and Spain. Some ask why they keep diving after such tragedy. But perhaps the better question is, how do you honor those lost to the deep? By giving up, or by diving smarter, safer, carrying their memory into every new adventure? The Plura cave tragedy changed cave diving forever. It taught us that nature's most beautiful places can be its deadliest. That courage means knowing when to turn back. And sometimes, the greatest act of bravery isn't conquering the deep, it's respecting its power. For Kai, Patrick, and Visa, each new dive carries a piece of their lost friends. And in the depths of every cave, their story lives on. As the icy darkness of Plura cave fades from view, another underworld awaits. William J. Coughlin entered with years of experience guiding his steps, but experience alone couldn't save him from what waited in the shadows. Deep within the twisted passages, an invisible danger was about to turn adventure into nightmare, proving once again that in the depths below, nature always has the final word. Not all heroes die in glory. Some disappear in the quiet darkness of underwater caves. William Coughlin was among the best until one dive in 1993 proved that nature follows no rules. What he encountered in those twisted tunnels would change how we think about cave diving safety forever. Tragic Histories brings you a story of adventure, overconfidence, and the ultimate price paid in pursuit of exploration. On a warm Friday morning, May 28, 1993, three nature enthusiasts packed their worn-out Honda Civic with camping gear and cave exploration equipment. William J. Coughlin, a 30-year-old insurance agent, along with his childhood friends James Zaka, 29, and Kevin Feely, 31, pulled out of their driveway in Springfield, Illinois, ready for what they thought would be another weekend adventure. The 382-mile journey to Cave City, Kentucky would take them about 7 hours through the heart of America's countryside. Cave City wasn't just a regular small town. With only 2,000 people living there, it was famous for its amazing underground caves. Sitting next to Mammoth Cave National Park, which has over 400 miles of caves, the town was a major spot for cave explorers. Underground rivers had carved these caves out of limestone rock over millions of years, creating a natural maze that attracted visitors from all over America. As the three friends drove into Kentucky in their Honda Civic, they had no idea that this simple weekend trip would turn into a tragedy. After an exhausting 8-hour drive, their car rolled into Cave City at 4:30 p.m. Tired but excited, they stopped at the local visitor center, where William picked up a bright yellow TMH Tennessee Mountain hiking brochure that would change their lives forever. The brochure showcased two very different ways to experience Burgers Rust Cave. The historic cave tour was perfect for regular tourists. Well-lit paths stretched for 2 miles through wide chambers, where ancient Native American drawings still decorated the limestone walls. But it was the Wild Cave Tour that caught their attention. This tour would take brave explorers through passages as narrow as 18 inches, where they'd have to crawl on their stomachs through spaces with names like the Squeeze and Devil's Crawl. The limestone rocks were so sharp that the tour required protective gear. Helmets, knee pads, and heavy-duty gloves were mandatory. What the brochure didn't mention was that some sections of Burgers Rust Cave remained unexplored and unmapped, a detail that would prove crucial in the hours to come. After 2 frustrating days of waiting due to a cave maintenance schedule and Memorial Day weekend crowds, the morning of May 30th, 1993, finally brought their chance. At 9:15 a.m., William, James, and Kevin arrived at Burgers Rust Cave's main entrance, where they met their guide, David Harding, a 45-year-old veteran cave explorer with 15 years of experience leading tours. The small group of 8 gathered near the cave's mouth. Each person paid $15 for what was supposed to be a standard 90-minute historical tour through the cave's main chambers. David Harding, wearing his faded red TMH guide uniform and carrying a professional-grade flashlight, collected their payments and began his usual safety briefing. Stay together, follow the marked paths, and never venture into any unmarked tunnels, he emphasized, not knowing these routine words would later haunt him. The limestone entrance to Burgers Rust Cave yawned before them, its cool 58-degree air drifting out to meet the warm Kentucky morning. At 9:30 a.m., David Harding pulled out a worn, single-page liability waiver form, a seemingly routine piece of paper that would later become crucial evidence. The form's bold letters at the top read, "Burgers Rust Cave, Visitor, Acknowledgement of Risk." Below, in small print that few would read carefully, lay words that would carry devastating weight. By signing this document, you acknowledge that cave exploration and adventuring are inherently dangerous activities. You voluntarily accept all risks. You hereby release and forever discharge Burgers Rust Historic Cave, its owners, operators, employees, and guides from any and all liability. Instead of individual forms, Harding passed around a single sheet where everyone would sign, a decision that violated the cave's standard safety protocols, requiring individual waivers. As the paper made its rounds, Kevin Feely, hands in his pockets, took a step back. Kevin decided to stay behind. "I'll wait in the car, guys," he told William and James. "Take lots of pictures." At 4:30 p.m., with the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, the group began their historic cave tour. The temperature dropped to a cool 55 degrees as they ventured into the well-lit main chamber. William traced his fingers along the limestone walls, feeling the smooth grooves carved by ancient underground rivers. James, an amateur photographer, captured images of 200-year-old signatures left by early settlers and Native American pictographs dating back over 2,000 years. At 6:45 p.m., they emerged from the cave, faces glowing with excitement. The safe, controlled experience had given them a false sense of confidence. That's when William suggested, "Why don't we try the Wild Cave tour?" Without hesitation, everyone reached for their wallets, paying Harding an additional $45 each for the advanced tour. At 7:00 p.m., with daylight fading outside, David Harding distributed individual liability waivers, this time following proper protocol. He handed out professional-grade flashlights with dual handles, each powered by heavy-duty batteries rated for 8 hours of continuous use. "Stay within earshot," Harding instructed firmly. "If you can't hear my voice, you've gone too far." The group formed a human chain as they entered the cave's wild section. The formation was critical. David Harding, lead guide, front. James Zaka, position 6. William Coughlin, last position. For William Coughlin, at 6'2" and 231 pounds, the cave seemed to shrink with every foot they advanced. The passages narrowed to just 20 inches in places, barely wider than a car tire. His broad shoulders scraped against the jagged limestone walls, each movement drawing fresh scratches across his arms and back. The cave's humidity made his clothes stick to his skin, adding to the discomfort. "You okay back there, Will?" James would call back every few minutes, his voice bouncing off the wet cave walls. What should have been a thrilling adventure was becoming an endurance test for the former college football player. At 8:15 p.m., the group reached a chamber they'd come to know as the drop point. Their flashlight beams revealed a 30-foot wooden ladder descending into darkness, its rungs darkened by years of cave moisture and wear. "Everyone listen," Harding's voice bounced off the walls. "This ladder has no safety harnesses or backup lines. Test each rung before putting your weight on it. Always keep 3 points of contact with the ladder." They descended one at a time. The old ladder creaked under each person's weight, its sound echoing through the chamber. What seemed like a challenging but manageable obstacle was just a preview. Deeper, in the cave system, a second, more dangerous ladder waited, one that would test their limits far more than this first descent. The second ladder presented a far more dangerous challenge. Only 15-20 feet long, it hung precariously from the cave wall, with its rungs pressed awkwardly against the narrow rock face. Between the two ladders lay the most treacherous part, a V-shaped passage that forced them to press their bodies against both walls to shimmy across. For William Coughlin's 6'2" frame, this section seemed almost impossible. His flashlight beam revealed the darkness below as he inched forward, his boots searching for any grip on the slick rock. Sweat dripped from his forehead despite the cave's cool air, but somehow he managed to cross, not knowing that getting back would be even more challenging. By 7 p.m., exhausted but triumphant, the group reached the final chamber, a vast underground hall where their voices echoed off unseen walls. "Congratulations, folks! The Wild Cave tour is officially complete," announced Harding, his words met with tired applause that bounced off the limestone ceiling. But as their flashlights cut through the darkness, Harding's tone suddenly changed. Checking his watch nervously, he gathered everyone close. "Listen up. We're running 2 hours behind schedule. We need to move fast to get out of here before it gets too late." At 7:15 p.m., despite Harding's urgency, the exhausted group collapsed onto the cave floor. William Coughlin, his clothes soaked with sweat and dotted with blood from rock scrapes, was breathing heavily. Harding seemed agitated. "I have to make an urgent call," he announced suddenly. "Stay right here. Don't move." His flashlight beam bounced off the walls as he disappeared up the ladders, leaving the group alone in the vast chamber. Time ticked by slowly in the darkness. 30 minutes, 40 minutes. At 8 p.m., with no sign of Harding's return, panic began to set in. The group made a fateful decision. They would find their way out themselves. One by one, they started climbing the second ladder. Only William remained below. As William faced the second ladder alone, the narrow passage seemed to close in around him. His 6'2" frame, already exhausted, struggled to find proper footing. Twice, he attempted to climb, his hands trembling on the rungs, only to slide back down. "You can do this, Will," James's voice echoed from above. "Just like we practiced in rock climbing, one step at a time." Frustration and exhaustion turned to anger. William grabbed the ladder forcefully, his movements becoming desperate. rather than careful. Then it happened. His right hand slipped on a wet rock beside the ladder. Time seemed to slow as he fell backward. The sickening crack of his head hitting the rock echoed through the chamber. James scrambled down to find William conscious, but bleeding heavily from a deep gash in his scalp. "Stay still, buddy. Stay still." James's hands shook as he tore off a piece of his shirt, pressing it against the wound. Blood quickly soaked the makeshift bandage. "Go!" he shouted to Tom Miller, who was nearby. "Find Harding. Get help. Run!" When Harding finally returned at 8:45 p.m., without medical help, James exploded. "Where the hell is the doctor? He's bleeding out down here." The cave walls amplified his voice, matching his fury. "The rescue team is 2 hours away," Harding admitted, his flashlight revealing William's pale face. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage, and William's eyes were struggling to focus. "He's showing signs of concussion," Harding observed. "We can't wait." Then Harding proposed what seemed like madness. They would manually haul William up the 15-foot ladder. "Are you insane?" James shouted, his voice cracking. "He can barely stay conscious." But Harding's grim reply silenced the chamber. "He'll die if we wait for help. The bleeding isn't stopping." The reality of their situation sank in. They had no choice. They formed a desperate plan. James would climb first, reaching down to pull William by his shoulders, while Harding would push from below. At 9:15 p.m., they reached the dreaded V-shaped passage. What had been challenging during their entrance now seemed impossible. The narrow walls, slick with cave moisture, converged at a 45-degree angle. William's broad shoulders, which had barely squeezed through earlier, now felt like a death trap. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Get him to twist sideways through the narrowest part, but everything went wrong. William's 231-pound frame wedged tight, his left arm pinned beneath his own weight. The passage had become a stone vise. "I'm stuck!" William's scream pierced the darkness, echoing through the cave system. "I can't move! I can't move!" His chest heaving in panic against the rock. At 10:30 p.m., Cave City's rescue team arrived, working quietly to avoid causing panic. But outside, a crowd had already gathered, murmuring about the haunting parallels to Floyd Collins, the legendary cave explorer who died trapped in Sand Cave just 50 miles away in 1925. Inside, the rescue operation began immediately. Medical personnel threaded their way through the narrow passages, administering first aid to William's head wound and setting up a portable oxygen tank. The cave temperature had dropped to a dangerous 52 degrees Fahrenheit, and William's wet clothes clung to his shivering body. The risk of hypothermia was growing with each passing minute. The situation had another deadly complication. David Harding was trapped behind William in the passage, unable to move forward or retreat. Through a small gap in the rocks, rescuers passed energy bars and hot coffee to both William and the trapped Harding. James Zaka, fighting exhaustion, kept talking to his friend. At 1 a.m. Monday morning, the rescue team attempted their most promising solution, a complex pulley system anchored into the cave walls. But each attempt to move William drew only agonized screams, then silence. By 5 a.m., May 31st, the unthinkable happened. William Coughlin, age 30, fell silent for the last time. James's desperate calls echoed unanswered through the passage. 7 hours later, at 12:45 p.m., after a grueling extraction process, they finally brought William's body out into the Kentucky sunlight. The doctor's report showed that William died from 3 things: the bad injury to his head, being too cold for too long, and losing too much blood. In August 1993, William's family went to court and asked for $2.5 million. They said the cave owners were careless about safety rules, but the cave's lawyer showed the form William had signed before entering. The form clearly said that anyone going into the cave accepted all risks, including death. The judge threw out the case in October 1993. The form William signed protected the cave owners from any blame. William Coughlin's death in 1993 changed cave exploring in Kentucky forever. Today, caves must follow strict safety rules, no night tours, better medical kits, and proper safety gear for climbing. As the tragic echo of William J. Coughlin's final moments falls silent, attention shifts to the unforgiving sea. The Byford Dolphin, a massive oil rig standing against the North Sea's fury, became the stage for disaster, not in nature's domain, but man's. 4 professional divers, working in crushing pressures, were about to face the most horrific industrial accident in diving history. A stark reminder that sometimes the deadliest dangers come not from the environment, but from the machines designed to conquer it. Can you imagine the horrifying moment when a routine job turns into a nightmare beyond imagination? In an instant, the crew of the Byford Dolphin oil rig found themselves thrust into history as part of one of the most gruesome diving accidents ever recorded. What should have been just another day at work, a standard saturation dive, became a horror show in the blink of an eye. But what went so tragically wrong? How did a process repeated countless times before turn deadly in a split second? And most chillingly, how did only one person make it out alive, forever scarred by the trauma of that day? The Byford Dolphin, an oil rig operating in the North Sea, was no stranger to danger. The rig employed saturation divers, workers who dive to great depths and remain under high-pressure conditions for extended periods, often up to a month. These divers, including Roy Lucas, Edwin Coward, Truls Hellevik, and Bjorn Bergersen, along with dive tenders William Crammond and Martin Saunders, faced daily risks. But none of them expected what was to come on that fateful morning of November 5th, 1983. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to work in a space no larger than a closet for 28 days straight, without ever stepping into the open air? That was the reality for these divers. They spent their shifts descending to unimaginable depths, doing dangerous maintenance work, only to return to a cramped, high-pressure living chamber. For these men, this was routine. They worked grueling 18-hour shifts with only 3 hours of rest in between. Their environment was claustrophobic, uncomfortable, and always tinged with the underlying threat of disaster. But they carried on because the pay was enticing, up to $45,000 a month. That kind of money kept them coming back, even if it meant putting their lives on the line every single day. On this particular morning, the divers Truls Hellevik and Bjorn Bergersen were tasked with maintenance work deep below the rig at a depth of 295 feet. Using a diving bell, they ascended back to the surface, preparing to re-enter their pressurized living chambers. But just as they returned, a series of catastrophic events would soon unfold, resulting in unimaginable horror. As Hellevik and Bergersen made their way into Chamber 1, 2 dive tenders, Crammond and Saunders, stood outside, responsible for reconnecting the diving bell to the hyperbaric chamber. For saturation diving, maintaining exact pressure between chambers is crucial. One small mistake can mean life or death. But after a grueling 12-hour shift, exhaustion likely crept in, and the unthinkable happened. At this point, everything should have gone smoothly. The process was routine. Close the diving bell door, slightly increase its pressure, close the door to Chamber 1, depressurize the trunk, and finally, release the clamp that connects the diving bell to the chamber. It's a carefully orchestrated series of steps designed to protect the divers from the deadly effects of rapid decompression. But what happens when even the slightest step goes wrong? The consequences are catastrophic. As Crammond moved to disconnect the diving bell from the chamber, the system experienced a violent depressurization. Instead of waiting for the chambers to equalize, the clamp was released prematurely. The result? A rapid drop from 9 atmospheres of pressure to just 1, akin to being catapulted from the depths of the ocean to the surface in the blink of an eye. Have you ever heard of the bends or decompression sickness? It's the condition that occurs when a diver ascends too quickly, causing nitrogen dissolved in the blood to form bubbles. It leads to excruciating pain, paralysis, and even death. Now imagine experiencing this decompression not gradually, but all at once, explosively. That's what happened to the men inside the chamber. The instant depressurization was nothing short of catastrophic. The immense force created a vacuum that tore through the chamber like a bomb. Hellevik, standing closest to the door, suffered the worst fate. Can you picture the sheer power it would take to force a human body through a small crescent-shaped opening? The pressure difference between the inside of the chamber and the outside was so great that Hellevik's body was effectively liquefied and forced through the gap. His internal organs were ejected from his body, some still inside the chamber, while others were flung out onto the deck. The scene was beyond comprehension, too horrific to fully grasp. Pieces of his spinal column, windpipe, and even parts of his intestine were later found scattered around the chamber. The other divers, Lucas, Coward, and Bergersen, were not spared from the carnage. Though they were further from the point of decompression, Their deaths were equally swift and brutal. In the blink of an eye, their blood had boiled inside their bodies as nitrogen gas expanded rapidly. The force was so immense that it caused fat to solidify in their arteries, veins, and organs. Their remains were left scattered in a state so mangled they were nearly unrecognizable. And yet, in the chaos, Saunders and Crammond, who were both outside the chamber, were struck by the flying diving bell. Crammond was fatally injured, while Saunders survived but with severe injuries, including collapsed lungs, multiple fractures in his spine, and a broken neck. How could such a catastrophic event have occurred during what was supposed to be a routine operation? As the details emerged, it became clear that human error likely played a significant role in the disaster. Either Crammond disconnected the bell prematurely, or the dive leader gave the order to release the clamp too soon. Whatever the cause, the result was the same: an explosive decompression that left 5 men dead and 1 fighting for his life. But was it entirely the fault of the crew, or was there something else at play? Many believe that the equipment used on the Byford Dolphin rig was outdated and faulty, lacking essential safety mechanisms that could have prevented the accident. Imagine operating machinery from 1975 in one of the world's most dangerous environments, without the modern fail-safes we rely on today. The system in use at the time lacked an interlocking mechanism, which would have made it impossible to open the clamp before the chambers were equalized in pressure. Could such an oversight have been the true culprit behind the disaster? In the aftermath, there was plenty of finger-pointing. Was it exhaustion from long work hours that led to the mistake? Was it a lack of proper training? Or was it simply that the equipment had been pushed past its breaking point? While the crew certainly bore some responsibility, it became increasingly clear that the oil company and the government had failed to provide adequate safety measures for these divers. And tragically, the true reason behind the mistake was lost forever with Crammond's death. It wasn't until 2009, decades after the incident, that the Norwegian government finally acknowledged their role in the disaster. They admitted that faulty equipment and insufficient safety protocols were largely to blame, and the families of the victims received long overdue settlements. But for the families of the 5 men who died that day, no amount of compensation could undo the horror of what happened. If you think this tragedy was a one-off, think again. The dangers of deep-sea operations remain as real today as they were back in 1983. Think back to the OceanGate submersible disaster of 2023. Though the circumstances were different, the underlying truth is the same. When you operate in extreme environments, the margin for error is razor-thin. Lives hang in the balance, and the smallest mistake can lead to catastrophic consequences. Could this happen again? Without constant vigilance, the answer is yes. So, who is truly to blame for the Byford Dolphin tragedy? Was it the crew worn down by exhaustion after hours of intense labor? Was it faulty, outdated equipment that should have been replaced long before the accident? Or was it the oil company itself, pushing workers to their limits in the name of profit? The answer is likely a combination of all three. But one thing is certain: the lessons learned from that day have shaped the way we approach safety in the oil and gas industry. Still, one question lingers. Could something like this happen again? Advances in technology have certainly improved safety measures, but as long as humans are involved in the equation, the potential for error remains. The North Sea Divers Alliance, a group formed by victims' families and divers, continues to push for greater accountability and improved safety standards. But they know all too well that even the best precautions can sometimes fail in the face of human error or mechanical malfunction. As we look back on the tragedy of the Byford Dolphin, we are left with more questions than answers. Could more have been done to prevent the accident? And what can we learn to ensure that no other crew suffers a similar fate? The horror of that day may never be forgotten, but the lessons it teaches us must not be ignored. If the ocean's depths can hide so many dangers, then what other untold stories of disaster are waiting to surface? Will history repeat itself, or have we learned enough from the past to protect the divers of tomorrow? One thing is clear: the legacy of the Byford Dolphin will forever be a reminder of the fine line between survival and tragedy in the unforgiving world beneath the sea. As the terrible story of the Byford Dolphin accident ends, one final cave waits in darkness. Veryovkina cave drops deeper into the earth than any other cave known to humans. A team of skilled explorers went down into this vertical maze of narrow passages and underground rivers, thinking they were ready for anything. But at the deepest point, farthest from safety, nature had saved its worst surprise, showing why the world beneath our feet remains our most dangerous frontier. Caving is a pursuit that draws those who seek adventure in the darkest, most unexplored corners of our world. But the thrill of the unknown comes with a price. In the depths of the earth, where light cannot penetrate and help is miles away, even the smallest mistake can have fatal consequences. This is the story of Sergei Koziev, a 37-year-old adventurer whose passion led him to the depths of Veryovkina cave, the deepest cave on Earth, in November 2020. What began as a daring solo expedition soon turned into a tragic tale of survival gone wrong. Sergei Koziev was no ordinary man. At 37, he was a husband, a father, and a man driven by a relentless thirst for adventure. His life in Sochi, Russia, was filled with physical challenges, marathons, mountain climbs, and hikes that tested the limits of his endurance. But despite his athletic pursuits, Sergei had only ventured into caves twice before. It was a decision that would lead him into the depths of the earth, where he would face the ultimate challenge and the most harrowing fight for survival. What could go wrong when one man goes too deep, too far from help, and too close to the edge? Veryovkina Cave is located in the Caucasus Mountains of Abkhazia, Georgia, near the border with Russia. It is the deepest known cave in the world, reaching over 7,057 feet, 2,212 meters below the surface. The cave is full of narrow, winding passages, steep drops, and unpredictable conditions that have challenged even the most experienced cavers. Gennady Samokin, an experienced caver, had explored the deepest parts of Veryovkina cave many times. Alongside him were Pavel Demidov, Sergei Kovalchuk, and Igor Baryshnikov, skilled explorers who knew all too well the dangers and challenges of this treacherous cave. In 2018, during one of their expeditions, the group faced a terrifying ordeal when a sudden flood trapped them deep within the cave. The rising waters and the narrow, winding passages turned the escape into a race against time. With their expertise and calm under pressure, the team managed to navigate the perilous situation, escaping to safety after hours of intense struggle. But this time, Sergei Koziev was going in alone, a choice that would test his strength and courage to the limit. On November 1st, 2020, Sergei set out from his home in Sochi, driving for hours to reach the remote entrance of the Veryovkina cave. He didn't tell his wife and children exactly where he was going. "I'm off to find the meaning of life," he joked, promising to be back in about a week. For Sergei, the thought of exploring the world's deepest cave was thrilling. He spent a year getting ready for his solo expedition. He studied maps, read reports, and looked at photos from past trips into the cave. He learned about the cave's layout, the dangers he might face, and the challenges that lay ahead. Sergei Koziev stood at the entrance of Veryovkina cave, staring into the darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly before him. The air was cool and damp, a hint of the cold depths that lay ahead. He adjusted his gear, securing the rope and lifeline around his waist, a crucial tether that would guide him back to the surface. The first few hundred feet were challenging, with narrow passages that forced him to squeeze through tight spaces and climb down steep drops, all while carefully feeding the rope through his hands to maintain a controlled descent. Sergei moved with precision, his headlamp cutting through the darkness and casting long shadows on the cave walls. The sound of dripping water echoed around him, and the temperature began to drop as he went deeper. The deeper he went, the more isolated he felt from the world above, the lifeline being his only connection to safety. After several hours of slow, deliberate progress, Sergei reached one of the main sections of the cave known as Camp 1, located around 1,250 feet, 380 meters below the surface. This area was a small, flat space where he could rest and gather his strength before continuing his journey. Sergei knew that from here, the challenges would only get harder. He studied his map, tracing the route he planned to take. His next major obstacle was the Baba Yaga pit, a massive vertical drop of over 500 feet, 150 meters. As he descended, the walls of the pit seemed to close in around him. The cold air rushed past, and the sound of his own breathing was the only thing keeping him company. The bottom of the pit was far below, and Sergei had to focus all his energy on maintaining control as he made his way down. Halfway down the pit, Sergei paused to catch his breath. The depth was overwhelming, and the darkness was complete. He could feel the strain in his arms and legs from controlling his descent. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sergei's feet touched the bottom. He let out a sigh of relief, but he knew he couldn't relax yet. He was now over 1,050 feet, 530 meters below the surface, and the hardest part of his journey was still ahead. The pit had tested his resolve, but it had also drained his energy. After the exhausting descent into Baba Yaga pit, Sergei continued his journey toward Camp 3, which was located around 3,300 feet, 1,000 meters below the surface. But the deeper he went, the more the cave seemed to conspire against him. The air was thick with humidity. His clothes were now completely soaked, clinging to his body and offering little protection against the cold. And then, at some point during his descent, Sergei realized he had made a critical mistake. He had forgotten to bring foot stirrups, a simple but essential piece of gear that would allow him to climb back up the ropes. Without them, the prospect of ascending the vertical shaft seemed nearly impossible. Every attempt to pull himself up, using just his hands, left him more exhausted and desperate. He knew that if he couldn't find a solution, he might be trapped in the cave forever. Sergei knew he needed to rest, but his mind wouldn't let him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the steep walls of Baba Yaga pit, the narrow twisting passages, and the impossible climb back to the surface. He couldn't stop thinking about the forgotten foot stirrups and how they might be the difference between life and death. He was miles away from the surface, trapped in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, with no one to help him. The cave was no longer just a challenge to be overcome. The thought of never seeing his family again, of dying alone in the darkness, fueled a desperate need to survive. But the cave was unforgiving and time was running out. Sergei Kozayev's family began to worry when he didn't return home after the week he had mentioned. As the days stretched into weeks, their concern grew into fear. They reached out to local authorities, reporting him missing and explaining that he had likely gone on one of his adventurous expeditions. Without knowing it, Sergei wasn't alone in the cave. A group of cavers had planned their own expedition into Veryovkina cave around the same time. When they entered the cave, they didn't realize that Sergei was already deep inside, struggling to survive. As they moved through the familiar passages, they noticed signs that someone else had been there recently. Scratches on the rocks, disturbed debris, and a rope that wasn't theirs. "Someone's been here," Pavel remarked as they paused to examine the rope. "But who? And why haven't we seen them?" Igor wondered aloud. The group continued their descent, moving carefully but quickly. When they reached the area near Camp 3, they found evidence of Sergei's struggle. Scattered gear, empty food wrappers, and signs that someone had tried to climb back up, but failed. "This isn't good," Gennady said. "Whoever it is, they're in trouble." The team knew that time was of the essence. If someone was trapped in the cave, they needed to find them quickly. They began to search the surrounding areas, calling out and hoping for a response. As they moved deeper into the cave, they finally came across the grim discovery: Sergei's body hanging limp from the rope, suspended in a vertical shaft known as the Baba Yaga pit, about 3,965 feet, 156 meters below the surface. The sight was heart-wrenching. Sergei had clearly fought to survive, but the cave had proven too much for him. The group was devastated by the discovery. They had faced the same dangers, but they had each other to rely on. Now, their mission shifted from exploration to recovery, a somber task that weighed heavily on them all. The cave's vertical shafts, particularly Baba Yaga pit, posed significant difficulties. The rescuers had to carefully rig ropes and pulleys to maneuver through these steep drops. After days of intense effort, the rescuers finally emerged from the depths of Veryovkina cave, carrying Sergei's body. The cave, which had claimed Sergei's life, had not been able to keep him hidden forever. For those who continue to seek out the unknown, Sergei's story serves as a cautionary tale. It reminds us that while the call of adventure is strong, it must be tempered with caution, preparation, and respect for the environment. The risks are real, and the consequences can be severe. Sergei's legacy lives on in the lessons learned from his journey. His story encourages us to push boundaries, but also to recognize when we need help, when to turn back, and when to prepare more thoroughly.